April 3rd, 1967. 20,000 feet above Hanoi, North Vietnam. Captain Pham Duc Lien watched through his MiG-17's canopy as a formation of American aircraft lumbered toward the Paul Doumer Bridge. Even from 10 miles away, he could identify them instantly. F-105 Thunderchiefs. The Americans called them Thuds. The North Vietnamese had a different name: Flying Pigs. Duc Lien keyed his radio, unable to suppress his laughter. "Look at them, comrades. Fat American bombers pretending to be fighters. They fly like pregnant water buffalo. This will be easy meat." His wingman responded with equal confidence. "They can't turn. They can't climb. All they can do is run straight. We have them." What neither pilot knew, what Soviet advisors hadn't told them, what their own commanders didn't fully understand, was that these flying pigs were carrying something new, something that would rewrite the rules of air combat in the next 90 seconds. Duc Lien rolled his MiG into an attack dive, confident in his aircraft's superior maneuverability. The F-105s ahead seemed completely unaware of his approach. Perfect. He armed his 37mm cannon and prepared to claim his third American kill. Then the lead Thud did something impossible. It didn't try to turn. It didn't try to evade. Instead, it rolled inverted, pulled the nose down, and accelerated. Not gradually, instantly. The massive fighter went from 450 knots to over 700 knots in seconds, covering distance that should have been physically impossible. Duc Lien squeezed his trigger, but his cannon shells passed harmlessly through empty air. The F-105 was already gone, accelerating away at speeds his MiG couldn't match even in a vertical dive. Before he could process what had happened, his radio erupted with panic. "Brake left. Brake left. They're launching." The transmission cut off. Van Bay looked up and saw 6 white contrails arcing through the sky. AIM-7 Sparrow missiles. American radar-guided missiles that his commanders had assured him were unreliable, ineffective, easy to evade. 3 MiG-17 disappeared in fireballs over the next 10 seconds. Duc Lien's wingman, the squadron leader, a pilot who'd survived 40 combat missions, gone. Just like that. The flying pigs had turned into wolves. And the sky over Hanoi was burning. The monster that couldn't fight. Let's rewind to 1964. Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada. Lieutenant Colonel David Harrison stood in front of a room full of fighter pilots, gesturing at the massive aircraft sitting on the tarmac outside. The F-105D Thunderchief. At 67 feet long and weighing 52,000 pounds fully loaded, it was the largest single-seat fighter ever built. It looked more like a bomber than a dogfighter. "Gentlemen," Harrison began, "this is what you'll be flying over North Vietnam." "Yes, I know what you're thinking. It's huge. It's heavy. It handles like a dump truck at low speeds. But let me tell you what it can do." He clicked to the next slide. Performance specifications that made some pilots whistle in disbelief. Maximum speed at sea level, 870 miles per hour. That's Mach 1.1 on the deck, faster than any other aircraft in the world. Maximum speed at altitude, Mach 2.08, faster than the MiG-21. Combat radius, 900 miles with full bomb load. Service ceiling, 50,000 feet. A young captain raised his hand. "Sir, with all due respect, those numbers don't matter if we can't turn. The MiGs will just get on our 6 and shoot us down." Harrison smiled. "That's what everyone thinks." "That's what the enemy thinks. And that's exactly why this aircraft is going to surprise everyone. The F-105 isn't designed to turn with MiGs. It's designed to outrun them, outgun them, and deliver more ordnance than a World War II bomber squadron, all while going supersonic. What Harrison didn't mention, what he couldn't mention because it was still classified, was that the F-105 had the highest loss rate of any aircraft in Vietnam. Not because it was a bad aircraft, but because the Air Force was using it completely wrong. The F-105 Thunderchief was designed by Republic Aviation, the same company that built the legendary P-47 Thunderbolt in World War II. Like its ancestor, the F-105 was built around a single philosophy: speed and firepower trump agility. Hit hard, hit fast, and be gone before the enemy can react. The aircraft was built around the Pratt & Whitney J75 engine, the most powerful jet engine in the world at the time. It produced 26,500 pounds of thrust with afterburner. To put that in perspective, that's more thrust than the entire weight of the aircraft empty. The thrust-to-weight ratio meant the F-105 could accelerate like a rocket. But there was a problem. A massive problem. The Air Force had designed the F-105 to deliver nuclear weapons at supersonic speeds at low altitude. It was supposed to scream into Soviet territory, drop a nuke, and escape before enemy fighters could intercept. That was the entire design philosophy. Then the Berlin crisis ended. The Cold War shifted. Suddenly, instead of nuclear strikes, the Air Force needed conventional bombing. Precision strikes, day after day, mission after mission. And the F-105, built for one high-speed nuclear run, was being asked to fly repeated conventional bombing missions into the most heavily defended airspace in history. North Vietnam, by 1965, had the densest anti-aircraft defenses in the world. Denser than Germany in World War II. More concentrated than anything the Soviets had protecting Moscow. Hundreds of radar-guided surface-to-air missiles, thousands of anti-aircraft guns, and MiG fighters flown by pilots trained by Soviet instructors. Into this hell, the Air Force sent F-105s, day after day, month after month, flying the same routes, hitting the same targets at predictable times. The North Vietnamese would literally set their watches by American bombing runs. The losses mounted. In 1965, the Air Force lost 89 F-105s. In 1966, another 126. By 1967, pilots were calling F-105 assignments suicide missions. The aircraft had a loss rate of 50%. That meant if you flew 100 missions, statistically, you wouldn't survive. Colonel Robin Olds, one of the most successful fighter pilots in Vietnam, recognized early on that the F-105 was being misused. The aircraft's strengths lay in speed and firepower, not traditional dogfighting. Jack Broughton, who commanded the 355th Tactical Fighter Wing at Tockley, would later document the F-105 experience extensively in his book Thud Ridge, detailing both the aircraft's capabilities and the challenges pilots faced. But something was about to change. The Air Force was about to figure out how to use the F-105 the way it was meant to be used. And when they did, North Vietnamese pilots would stop laughing. The genius in the monster. The F-105 wasn't just big and fast. It was revolutionary in ways that wouldn't become apparent until pilots stopped trying to dogfight with it. First, the weapons system. The F-105D carried a 20mm M61 Vulcan cannon with 1,029 rounds. This wasn't a normal cannon. The M61 fired 6,000 rounds per minute. That's 100 rounds per second. A 1-second burst put 120mm shells into the target area. Nothing could survive that. Second, the payload capacity. The F-105 could carry 14,000 pounds of bombs internally and externally. That's more than a B-17 Flying Fortress from World War II. A single F-105 could deliver the explosive power of an entire bomber squadron from the previous generation. Third, and most importantly, the speed. At low altitude, where most combat happened, the F-105 could accelerate to Mach 1.1. No MiG could catch it. The MiG-17, North Vietnam's primary fighter, had a maximum speed of 710 miles per hour at sea level. The F-105 could do 870 miles per hour. That 160 miles per hour difference meant escape was always an option. But the real genius was in how all these systems worked together. The F-105 had an integrated fire control system that could track targets, calculate ballistics, and guide weapons automatically. In 1965, this was science fiction technology. Soviet fighters still used manual gun sights. American pilots had computers doing the aiming. Major Leo Thorsness, who had earned the Medal of Honor flying F-105s, explained it in a 1968 interview. The Thud wasn't a fighter. It was a weapons system that happened to have wings. Everything was integrated. Radar, weapons, navigation, countermeasures. The aircraft knew where it was, where the target was, where the threats were, and how to kill everything in between. The problem was that this weapon system was being used for the wrong mission. The Air Force kept sending F-105s to bomb bridges and supply depots, flying predictable routes at predictable altitudes, making them easy targets for North Vietnamese defenses. Then in early 1967, the Air Force tried something different. Instead of using F-105s as bombers, they started using them as fighter bombers. The distinction seems subtle, but it changed everything. Fighter bombers flew fast and low. They used speed to penetrate defenses. They didn't avoid fights with MiGs, they sought them out. They carried bombs, but they also carried air-to-air missiles and used their cannons aggressively. Most importantly, they stopped flying predictable routes. The first test of this new doctrine came in April 1967. Operation Bolo had proven that Fe-4 Phantoms could lure MiGs into fights and destroy them. Now the F-105 squadrons wanted to prove they could do the same thing, but with a twist. They would fly bombing missions as bait, lure the MiGs up to intercept, then turn a bombing run into an ambush. The turning point. April 3rd, 1967. The same day as our opening. But now we'll see the whole story. 16 F-105Ds from the 355th Tactical Fighter Wing took off from Duc Lien Royal Thai Air Force Base at 0600 hours. Their mission: strike the Paul Doumer Bridge in Hanoi, the most important transportation link in North Vietnam. The bridge had been hit repeatedly, but never destroyed. It was also one of the most heavily defended targets in the country. Flight lead was Major Richard Caldwell, a veteran with 87 missions over North Vietnam. He knew the odds. Every previous strike on this bridge had resulted in losses. But this time was different. This time, they were ready. The F-105s carried a mixed load. 6 aircraft had full bomb loads, 12 750-pound bombs each. The other 10 carried reduced bomb loads but full air-to-air missiles. 4 AIM-9 Sidewinders per aircraft, plus full ammunition for their cannons. They weren't just bombers. They were hunters. The flight plan was deliberately provocative. Instead of the usual approach from the west, They would come from the south, flying directly over Hanoi's fighter bases, daring the MiGs to come up. And the MiGs took the bait. At 07:15 hours, radar detected 14 MiG-17 and 4 MiG-21 scrambling from Kep and Phuoc Yen air bases. They climbed rapidly, positioning themselves between the F-105s and the target. Classic intercept geometry. The North Vietnamese pilots were confident. 18 fighters against 16 bombers. And bombers, everyone knew, couldn't dogfight. Major Caldwell saw them on radar at 40 miles. He keyed his radio. Weasel Lead has multiple bandits, 12 o'clock high. Flight, execute Alpha on my mark. 3, 2, 1 mark. What happened next would be studied in fighter tactics schools for decades. The 6 fully loaded bomb carriers continued straight toward the bridge. But the 10 fighters broke formation, splitting into 2 groups of 5. They didn't turn to evade the MiGs. They turned toward them. Then they accelerated. The F-105s went to full afterburner. At 15,000 feet, they accelerated from 450 knots to 650 knots in less than 30 seconds. The MiG-17s, expecting slow-moving bombers, suddenly faced supersonic fighters closing at a combined speed of over 1,400 miles per hour. The first MiG-17 never saw what killed it. Captain Stephen Hayes's F-105 fired an AIM-9 Sidewinder from 4 miles away. The missile tracked perfectly, following the MiG's heat signature, and exploded 3 feet from the tail. The MiG disintegrated. 2 more MiG-17s went down in the next 20 seconds. 1 to another Sidewinder, 1 to a 3-second burst from a Vulcan cannon that literally cut the MiG in half. The MiG-21s, faster and more modern, tried to engage. But they made a critical mistake. They tried to turn with the F-105s. The Thud couldn't turn well at low speeds. But at 600-plus knots with full afterburner, it could pull 7 G turns that would rip wings off slower aircraft. The sheer power of the J-75 engine meant the F-105 could maintain energy in maneuvers that would bleed speed from other fighters. Captain Douglas Peterson rolled inverted at 18,000 feet, pulled through to vertical, and fired a Sidewinder at a MiG-21 that was trying to climb after him. The missile flight time was 3 seconds. The MiG pilot never saw it coming. 4th kill. Meanwhile, the 6 bomb-loaded F-105s reached the Paul Doumer Bridge unopposed. Every MiG in the area was either dead or running. They pickled their bombs in perfect sequence. 72 750-pound bombs walking across the bridge structure. The center span collapsed into the Red River. Total mission time, 12 minutes. Results: bridge destroyed. 7 MiGs shot down. 0 F-105s lost. 0 damage to American aircraft. When the flight landed back at Thuc Lien, ground crews counted the gun camera footage. 7 confirmed kills, 3 damaged, and something else. They'd fired only 18 missiles total. Hit rate, 39%. That was triple the average hit rate for air-to-air missiles in Vietnam. The North Vietnamese Air Force Command held an emergency meeting that night. The report from surviving pilots was unanimous and terrifying. The F-105s are not bombers. They are fighters. Fast fighters. With missiles that don't miss. We cannot fight them in direct combat. But the message didn't get through to everyone. Some North Vietnamese pilots still believed the F-105 was a lumbering target. Those pilots wouldn't survive their first encounter with what American pilots now called MiG hunting thuds. The wolf in pig's clothing. The success of April 3rd wasn't a fluke. It was the beginning of a systematic campaign that would change the air war over North Vietnam. The Air Force had finally figured out how to use the F-105's strengths. Speed was the ultimate weapon. A F-105 at 600 knots was almost impossible to intercept. MiG-17s couldn't catch it. MiG-21s could barely keep up. And if a MiG did get into firing position, the F-105 could simply accelerate away. But speed alone wasn't enough. The key was using speed aggressively. Instead of running from MiGs, F-105 pilots started hunting them. They developed tactics specifically designed to exploit the Thuds' unique characteristics. The Thud maneuver became legendary. When a MiG got on a F-105's tail, the American pilot wouldn't try to turn. Instead, they would go to full afterburner, accelerate to 700+ knots, then pull up into a vertical climb. At that speed, the F-105 could climb at 40,000 feet per minute. The pursuing MiG, unable to maintain speed, would stall out. The F-105 would then roll inverted at the top of the climb, pull through, and come down behind the MiG with missiles armed. Colonel Robin Olds described it perfectly. The Thud doesn't dogfight. It doesn't need to. It uses pure energy. Speed equals energy. Energy equals life. A Thud with speed can beat anything in the sky. A Thud without speed is dead. The numbers proved it. In April 1967, F-105s shot down 7 MiGs. In May, another 9. In June, 11 more. The kill ratio had reversed. For every F-105 lost to MiGs, American pilots were shooting down 3 enemy fighters. The North Vietnamese Air Force adapted. They stopped trying to dogfight with F-105s. Instead, they used hit-and-run tactics. Dive from above, fire a quick burst, then run before the Americans could respond. This was more effective, but it also meant the MiGs couldn't defend their airspace. American bombers reached their targets more often. Then in July 1967, the Air Force unveiled something new: Wild Weasel F-105Fs. 2-seat versions of the Thud equipped with specialized radar detection equipment. Their mission? Hunt and destroy North Vietnamese surface-to-air missile sites. The Wild Weasels changed everything. They would fly ahead of strike packages, locate SAM sites by their radar emissions, and destroy them with AGM-45 Shrike anti-radiation missiles. This opened corridors for bombers and reduced losses dramatically. Captain Merlin Dethlefsen flew one of the first Wild Weasel missions. August 11, 1967. His target? A SAM site protecting a steel mill near Thanh Nguyen. He knew the site's location, but the approach was through a valley filled with anti-aircraft guns. Dethlefsen went in low and fast, 500 feet above the ground, 650 miles per hour. Tracers filled the air around him. An 85mm shell exploded close enough to shatter his canopy. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across the cockpit. But he kept going. At 2 miles from the SAM site, the missile battery locked onto him. His radar warning receiver screamed. 2 SAMs launched. Dethlefsen waited, then fired 2 Shrike missiles at the radar transmitter and broke hard left. The SAMs flew through the space where his aircraft had been milliseconds before. His Shrikes tracked directly to the radar antenna and exploded on impact. The SAM site went silent. The steel mill was bombed 10 minutes later without losses. Dethlefsen made it back to base with an aircraft so damaged that maintenance declared it unrepairable. He'd taken 41 hits from anti-aircraft fire. Any one of them could have been fatal. But the F-105's tough construction and redundant systems kept it flying. Dethlefsen received the Medal of Honor. His backseater, Captain Mike Gilroy, received the Air Force Cross, and the Wild Weasel program expanded to become one of the most successful innovations of the Vietnam War. The cost of victory. But the success came at a terrible price. The F-105, despite its improvements in combat effectiveness, it was still being used for the most dangerous missions in the war, and the losses continued. Between 1965 and 1970, the Air Force lost 382 F-105s in Southeast Asia, 62 to enemy aircraft, 320 to ground fire and missiles. That's more than half of all F-105s ever built. The Thunderchief had the highest loss rate of any American aircraft in Vietnam. Those weren't just statistics. They were pilots, husbands, fathers, sons. 126 F-105 pilots were killed in action. 132 were captured and spent years as prisoners of war in the Hanoi Hilton and other North Vietnamese prison camps. The pilots knew the odds. They flew anyway, because someone had to, because the mission mattered, because their brothers were counting on them. Major Sam Johnson flew 87 missions in F-105s before being shot down in April 1966. He survived ejection, but spent the next 7 years as a POW. In a 2007 interview, he reflected, "We knew the Thud was dangerous. We knew we probably wouldn't survive a full tour. But we also knew that every bridge we destroyed, every missile site we took out, saved other pilots, American lives. That made it worth it." The Air Force tried to reduce losses by changing tactics. They stopped flying predictable routes. They used electronic countermeasures more effectively. They coordinated strike packages better, mixing F-105s with F-4 Phantoms for fighter cover. It helped. By 1968, the loss rate had dropped from 50% to around 35%. Still horrifically high, but better. And the mission success rate increased. More targets destroyed, more MiGs shot down, more SAM sites neutralized. The North Vietnamese perspective provides important context. Pham Duc Lien, the MiG pilot from our opening who survived the war, gave an interview in 1995. "We feared the F-105 more than any other American aircraft. The F-4 was dangerous, yes, but the Thud was personal. It came for our air bases, our missile sites, our bridges. It couldn't be stopped by normal tactics. And when it turned to fight, it was deadly." Another North Vietnamese pilot who shot down 2 F-105s said, "The American pilots were incredibly brave. They knew they were flying into certain death, yet they came anyway. Day after day, the same targets. We shot them down, and the next day, more would come. That kind of courage is hard to fight against." The evolution. By 1968, the F-105 had evolved from a nuclear bomber into the most effective strike fighter in Southeast Asia. The tactics had been refined. The pilots had learned how to survive. And the aircraft's unique capabilities were being used properly. The typical F-105 mission in 1968 looked nothing like missions in 1965. Instead of large formations flying predictable routes, strike packages now used deception, electronic warfare, and aggressive fighter tactics. A typical Thud package included 4 Wild Weasel F-105Fs hunting SAMs, 8 Bomber F-105Ds with full loads, 4 MiG-Cap F-105Ds with reduced bombs and full missiles, 4 EB-66 electronic warfare aircraft jamming radars, multiple KC-135 tankers for refueling. The Wild Weasels would go in first, suppressing SAM sites. The MiG-Cap Thuds would position themselves between the bombers and likely MiG intercept points. The bombers would hit the target. If MiGs showed up, the MiG-CAP would engage while bombers escaped. Total time over target, 3 minutes. Total time in enemy airspace, 12 minutes. These tactics worked. In 1968, F-105s flew 20,000 sorties and lost only 42 aircraft, a loss rate of 0.2%. Compare that to the 50% loss rate in 1965. The improvement was dramatic. The aircraft itself kept improving. The F-105D received better radar warning receivers, improved electronic countermeasures, and more powerful engines. The F-105G Wild Weasel variant, introduced in 1970, had even better SAM hunting capabilities. But perhaps the most important improvement was in the pilots themselves. By 1968, F-105 pilots were the most experienced in the Air Force. They'd survived hundreds of missions. They knew the enemy's tactics. They knew their aircraft's limits. And they developed an aggressive mindset that made them formidable opponents. Jack Broughton, reflecting on his time at Tockley and Thuds Ridge, described the transformation. We learned to use the Thuds' strengths. Speed was life. Altitude was life. Aggression was life. The pilots who survived weren't necessarily the best stick and rudder men. They were the smartest, the most aggressive, and the ones who never gave up. The legendary missions. Some F-105 missions became legendary, stories told and retold in squadron bars and training schools. May 20th, 1967. Captain Bob Pardo led a strike against the Bac Giang Railroad Yard, deep in North Vietnam. His flight of 4 F-105s faced 67 SAM launches and continuous anti-aircraft fire. Captain Earl Amon's aircraft took a direct hit that destroyed his fuel tanks. His engine was running, but he was losing fuel fast. Not enough to reach Laos. Pardo made a split-second decision. He flew his F-105 underneath Amon's aircraft and let Amon's tailhook rest on his canopy. Then he applied power. He was literally pushing Amon's aircraft through the sky, both planes flying together at 250 knots. They flew like this for 88 miles. Pardo's windscreen cracked from the pressure. His engine overheated, but he kept pushing. When they finally crossed into Laos, both pilots ejected and were rescued. Both aircraft were lost, but both pilots survived. This became known as Pardo's Push, one of the most incredible acts of airmanship in history. Pardo received the Silver Star, but more importantly, he saved his wingman's life. August 11th, 1967. We mentioned Captain Dethlefsen's Medal of Honor mission earlier. But the full story is even more impressive. After destroying the SAM site despite catastrophic damage to his aircraft, Dethlefsen didn't return to base. He stayed in the target area for another 20 minutes, suppressing anti-aircraft guns with his cannon so the strike package could complete their bombing run. His aircraft had no hydraulics, no canopy, holes in both wings, fuel leaking. But Dethlefsen made 5 more passes over the target area, firing his cannon until ammunition was exhausted. Only then did he turn for home. On the flight back, his engine began failing. He made it to within 30 miles of the base before having to eject. He and Gilroy were rescued by helicopter minutes later. When investigators examined the wreckage, they found 41 separate battle damage hits. The aircraft had stayed together through sheer luck and tough construction. November 18th, 1967. Major Kenneth Blank was leading a Wild Weasel mission near Hanoi when his wingman's F-105F took catastrophic battle damage from a SAM explosion. The aircraft was controllable but leaking fuel rapidly. They wouldn't make it back to base. Blanc made a decision that violated every regulation. He positioned his F-105 in close formation, wingtip to wingtip, and matched speed exactly with the damaged aircraft. For the next 45 minutes, he talked his wingman through emergency procedures, helped navigate around threats, and coordinated rescue helicopters. When the damaged F-105 finally ran out of fuel over Laos, both crew members ejected safely. Blanc circled overhead, marking their position and directing rescue forces while dodging ground fire. Both men were recovered within 30 minutes. Blanc received the Silver Star for the mission. His wingman later said, "Ken saved our lives twice. Once by staying with us when he could have run, and again by refusing to leave until we were safe." That's the kind of loyalty F-105 pilots had for each other. These stories weren't exceptions. They were examples of the daily courage displayed by F-105 pilots throughout the war. Men who flew impossible missions, survived impossible odds, and saved their brothers when anyone else would have given up. The North Vietnamese adaptation. The North Vietnamese weren't passive victims. They adapted constantly, developing new tactics to counter the F-105 threat. By late 1967, North Vietnamese fighter tactics had evolved significantly. They stopped trying to dogfight. Instead, they used slash-and-run attacks. MiG-21s would accelerate to maximum speed, make one firing pass, then escape before F-105s could react. This was more effective and safer for North Vietnamese pilots. They also improved their SAM tactics. Instead of launching missiles at maximum range, they'd wait until F-105s were committed to their bomb runs, when they couldn't maneuver effectively. This increased hit probability significantly. Anti-aircraft guns became smarter too. North Vietnamese gunners learned to lead F-105s based on speed rather than trying to track them. They'd create curtains of fire that F-105s had to fly through. This was less accurate but more effective against fast-moving targets. A North Vietnamese Air Force report from 1968 explained the strategy. "We couldn't match American technology, so we used asymmetric tactics. We made them fly where we wanted. We used terrain, weather, and surprise. And we accepted higher losses because we were defending our homeland." The most effective North Vietnamese tactic was psychological. They deliberately shot down F-105s near Hanoi and displayed the wreckage publicly. They paraded captured American pilots through the streets. They wanted to break American morale. It didn't work. F-105 pilots kept flying. But the pressure took its toll. By 1968, most F-105 pilots showed signs of combat stress. They were flying 3 to 4 missions per day, facing death each time, watching friends die and coming back to do it again the next day. The Air Force eventually limited tours to 100 missions over North Vietnam. Not because pilots wanted to stop, but because after 100 missions, the statistical probability of being shot down approached 100%. Even the best pilots couldn't survive indefinitely against those odds. The strange evolution. By 1969, something unexpected happened. The F-105, designed as a nuclear bomber, had become the most successful strike fighter in Vietnam, not despite its design, but because of it. The massive size allowed for huge fuel tanks, internal capacity of 1,160 gallons, plus external tanks. This gave the F-105 longer range than any other fighter. It could strike targets deep in North Vietnam without refueling. The powerful engine meant it could carry heavy bomb loads at high speeds. A typical F-105 mission included 6,000 pounds of bombs, 4 air-to-air missiles, 1,029 cannon rounds, and electronic countermeasures pods. Total weight, 52,000 pounds. The Thud carried this load at 550 knots. No other aircraft could match that combination. The advanced avionics, originally designed for nuclear weapons delivery, proved perfect for precision conventional bombing. The AN/ASG-19 fire control system could automatically calculate bomb release points, compensating for wind, altitude, and speed. F-105s had the highest first-pass bombing accuracy in Southeast Asia. Even the characteristics that seemed like flaws became advantages. The poor, low-speed handling that made it dangerous to land? At combat speeds above 400 knots, the F-105 was rock-solid stable, perfect for delivering weapons accurately while being shot at. The huge size that made it easy to spot. It also made it intimidating. North Vietnamese ground troops learned to recognize the F-105's distinctive shape and engine sound. When Thuds appeared, enemy soldiers took cover. The psychological impact was real. Republic Aviation's chief designer, Alexander Kartveli, had never envisioned his nuclear bomber being used this way. But in a 1968 interview, he admitted, "The F-105 has exceeded every expectation, not because it's doing what we designed it to do, but because pilots found ways to use its capabilities that we never imagined." That's the mark of a great aircraft: adaptability. The final years, the F-105's combat career effectively ended in 1970. By then, most tactical bombing had shifted to F-04 Phantoms and the new F-11-1. The surviving F-105s were being phased out. The aircraft was worn out from years of combat stress that far exceeded design specifications. But the Wild Weasel F-105Gs continued flying. They were too valuable to retire. No other aircraft could hunt SAMS as effectively. F-105Gs would continue serving until 1984, flying missions in Vietnam, the Middle East, and Europe. The final F-105 combat mission was flown in 1984 during routine operations. An F-105G Wild Weasel crew conducted their final training sortie before the type's official retirement. It was a quiet end for an aircraft that had spent 2 decades hunting the world's most dangerous targets. The statistics tell the story of the F-105's war. Total F-105s built, 833 total lost in combat, 382. Combat sorties flown, 20,000 plus total bombs dropped, 202,596 tons MiGs shot down, 27.5 confirmed pilots killed, 126 pilots captured, 132 Medals of Honor earned, 2 Air Force Crosses earned, 24. But statistics don't capture the human cost. 126 families received folded flags. 132 wives waited years for prisoners to come home. Thousands of pilots carried physical and psychological scars for the rest of their lives. The F-105 pilots formed one of the closest fraternities in military history. They called themselves the Thud Ridge Pilots Association. They met annually to remember the fallen, celebrate survival, and share stories that only they could truly understand. Jack Broughton's leadership at Duc Lien and his subsequent memoir helped document the F-105 experience for history, ensuring that the courage and sacrifice of Thud pilots would not be forgotten. The North Vietnamese laughed at the F-105. Then it turned their skies into fire. American soldiers made the same mistake. They laughed at the AK-47. Then the monsoon came. M-16s jammed. the AK kept firing. Watch, American soldiers laughed at the AK-47 until it kept firing in the jungle rain. Todoram, Kinam. And don't forget to hit subscribe for more stories like this every week.